Let's take a look at some Faith and Fury in action. We'll look over 5 of the top performing Sisters of Battle army lists, and the choices that good players took to bring them to the top of various tournaments. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Adepta Sororitas once more, and in this video I thought we'd take a look at 5 strong Sisters of Battle army lists to see what's doing well for the Emperor's Faithful right now. The Sisters of Battle do seem to have been having a pretty good time of it in competitive events since their codex came out. Pretty strong win rates on the competitive scene, around about 54% in the first few weeks since the big data slate update, including 3 solid grand tournament wins already, showing they're definitely a faction that can be fighting for the top spots on the regular. Kind of as expected, with a fun and powerful codex, their competitive play rate is really quite popular right now. It looks like they're around about, say, 11th out of the 26 major factions of Warhammer 40k in terms of play rate, which is far higher than they are normally, being a slightly niche faction that's kind of expensive to collect. For detachment choices, Bringers of Flame really does seem to be the winner for most people. Fast and punchy direct damage dealing with big strength and movement boosts really is very easy to use, plus they've got plenty of very nice stratagem support and some good enhancements. But kind of as a lot of people were expecting from the codex, people do seem to be doing at least fairly well with literally all of the rest of them. Maybe Hallowed Martyrs being the next most commonly successful one, but Army of Faith and Penitent hosts definitely have their scary things as well. And a lot of the Sisters' datasheets are just very punchy and dangerous in general. For a few common themes of units, maybe some of the most staple also includes things like more than Vahl Paragon warsuits, the Triumph of St. Catherine, some nice Volume 5 Castigators for the backfield. The Bringers of Flame really get on well with Seraphim, Immolators, and Dominions in particular, as well as some others. And for characters to lead squads, the Dialogus, Palatine, and Canonesses all seem to be the most popular leader choices, which I was kind of anticipating from the codex. In any case, let's take a look at 5 strong army lists and the units chosen to take them to victory. Starting off with those scary Bringers of Flame, this army list was by Scott Ketchum, who used it to take first at Battle for the Capital, going 5-0 against a field of 58 players. Bringers of Flame is the one that gives you all your weapons the assault keyword, so everything can be moving around very quickly, particularly good for getting flamers and melters into close range. And when you do get in within 12 inches, you also get +1 strength as well, which is quite nice for a bunch of breakpoints. Hand flamers are strength 5, Ministorum flamers are strength 6, and melter guns go to strength 10. They also get an Armour of Contempt equivalent, which is quite nice for Paragon suits, devastating wound torrents, and a bunch of stratagems that can help units getting in and out of transports. Heading up this list, we've got more than Vahl leading a squad of 3 Paragon warsuits, and there's also a second squad of Paragon warsuits on the field as well. These units are just absolutely apocalyptic levels of threat, particularly against vehicles. Big +1 to hit and wound on offer, generally scary profiles, and more than Vahl granting full rerolls to hit and wound just in case they didn't have enough reliability. They aren't super durable though, so need to be played with carefully. The Triumph of St. Catherine farms out automatic 6 miracle dice and gives you some pretty powerful auras such as movement or various damage and defense type ones. There's a jump canoness with a Blessed Halberd who takes the Iron Surplus enhancement. I'd guess she's probably running with the Seraphim unless she's going solo. 3 stratagems for the Seraphim can be very nice though, with all those devastating wounds on offer. There's a Dialogus and a Palatine. The Dialogus can be used for those automatic 6 miracles, so can be very punchy for melter weapons. The Palatine gets Righteous Rage, which can make her incredibly fighty in close combat. My guess would be that they'd probably be joining the Dominions in the Immolators. There's 3 Immolators with twin multi-melters, transporting 2 sets of Dominions, which I guess they'd be splitting in half. One squad of Dominions takes melter guns and an Inferno pistol, one takes Ministorum flamers, and they can scout up the board, potentially going really quite far if they can still nose within the Triumph's aura. You could easily threaten first turn alpha strikes with a bunch of scary melter and flamer fire right into the enemy deployment zone. All of those units can just hand out massive damage and really get on well with the detachment rules as well. There's a squad of 10 novitiates which can scout out into the midfield, hold down an objective early, and potentially screen so you've got the ability to move your scout moves up if you want to. And then finally, lurking in the backfield, there's a pair of Castigators, one with an autocannon and one with a battle cannon. They can put down the special rule where they boost AP. Overall, lots of really scary stuff there. Plenty of small units to be doing actions and secondaries if needed, and lots of nasty threats that could trade up with the enemy hard, particularly if they're supported by auto 6 miracle dice from the Triumph. Focusing on some of the units that were used in this one, the Dominion squad is 115 points. Since the update, they feel like they're one of the top tier Sisters infantry choices. They scout 6 inches, which they can also do if there's a character embarked within a vehicle. They get Assault on their Melters and Flamers, which means they're super easy to get them in range, even if you weren't in the Bringers of Flame detachment. They can recycle a Miracle Dice and have a chance to generate another one with the Simulacrum if they're on an objective. That can be quite nice if the squad split in half with an Immolator, so you could have the one without the special weapons sat on the home field potentially. And they also get quite a nice disruptive reactive move, which could potentially try and keep them safe if they can potentially hit the enemy and then maybe fade behind cover or away from melee. Immolators are a bit of a staple in Bringers of Flame, 115 points as well for an 11 wound tank. As mentioned, it is quite helpful to be able to split Battle Sisters or Dominion squads in half to create some handy small objective scoring units with the Simulacrum, and they're often taken with multi-melters for the most common loadout. Even one failed save can be a massive deal, and you're quite likely to get it with twin linked, and then hopefully punch in an automatic damage 6+2. They also strip cover from enemy units as well, which could be quite nice for supporting things like Castigators or other lower AP stuff. The Immolation Flamers definitely aren't a bad choice either. 2d6, strength 6, AP1 and damage 1 shots can thin out hordes quite a lot, and they can be quite a nice option for doing a bit of Overwatch. Otherwise, for Bringers of Flame staples, I thought it was worth talking about the Seraphim. They're a bit pricier than they used to be at 85 points per 5 of them, but they're fairly godly for secondary objectives. Being able to deep strike and then move, shoot, move means they can get into unusual board locations, or even do that. If they start on the board, they can effectively have somewhere between 19 and 24-inch move depending on how well the advanced roll goes for Bringers of Flame. And of course in that detachment they can gain access to Strength 5 Hand Flamers, which are just murderous, and the devastating wound torrent stratagem, so you could dunk on one unit with a whole bunch of automatic wounds that bypass armor and invulnerables. They're used in a small 5 squad in that list, but plenty of armies do take full 10-woman squads and go for absolutely maximal hand flamer goodness. Next up, I was interested to see if anyone had managed to have some success with the Penitent host. It looks like Aidan Brocklehurst at the Winchester GT did pretty well, going 4 wins to 1 loss to place 5th overall, but it does look like the loss was in the last round of the event, so I guess at that point was challenging to win it. The Penitent host is the one that supports all of the Penitent units to make them just massively more dangerous. 3 different choices of buffs, whether it's extra speed, extra damage, or fights on death, all of which can be an absolutely massive deal on the right turn or against the right army. They back that up with a lot of stratagems that add extra damage or extra threat range. Being able to advance and charge is quite a big one. Perhaps the core of the list for this one looks like it's built around 40 very scary Penitents rushing at the enemy, 2 squads of 10 Repentia and 2 squads of 10 Arco Flagellants. With the detachment buffs on offer, they've got a good chance to do major damage to anything that any of them can contact. The Arco Flagellants put a good amount of wounds on the table as well, though the Repentia are very flimsy if they get counter-attacked. It looks like one of the Repentia units is using a Palatine to join them with that Catechism of Divine Penitence. It can just make their damage output utterly unhinged, giving them critical hits on a 5+ with a stratagem that gets you both sustained and lethal hits, which is truly murderous. Never mind the Palatine's own damage herself. It looks like both of the Arco Flagellants are led by a Ministorum priest with Zealot's Vindictor. One has the Psalm of Righteous Judgment that allows you to turn more miracle dice into results of 6. The other with the Verse of Holy Piety to allow their unit to get an extra vow, so you could potentially both be moving very fast and hitting very hard, for example. It looks like most of those are either going to be using terrain to move up, or maybe doing things like rapid ingress potentially. You could potentially deploy them really quite a long way back and still have good threat range, with things like advance and charge and miracle dice of 6 on offer. And there's just one rhino to transport them, so one of them could use those as a battlefield bunker. I'd guess some of the Repentia. Then there's one lonely Dialogist, I guess just probably running solo to do actions and things, being a very cheap 30-point unit. And there's the staple Triumph of St. Catherine, who'll be able to give all of the on-the-board units a +2 to move, so further increase their threat range. You could easily have these units charging from one deployment zone to the next with some good rolls or miracle dice. Then there's a small unit of 3 Arco Flagellants. Could be nice for doing actions and things, and still could genuinely be a threat to some lighter infantry units with the amount of volume attacks. There's one squad of Seraphim with Hand Flamers, again very nice for the drop-in and the jump-shoot-jump type things. A Holy Fire base of 3 Castigators with battle cannons, which certainly could be pretty handy for dealing with lower priority targets with a whole bunch of volume-heavy bolter fire, but also do get their Rites of Castigation rule, which improves AP against the unit until the end of the turn, so that means that your Arco Flagellants could be going in with AP1 or the Repentia with AP3. Then there's a squad of 2 Penitent engines with Flamers and Buzzblades. Again, they can be just ridiculously fast and incredibly murderous in this detachment. If they start next to the Triumph with the Vahl for extra movement, they could be moving 13 inches and then also advancing and charging with easy access to a 6-inch advance if they need it, a huge threat to anything in the midboard and beyond. And finally a Cowardice Assassin for jumping around and doing some secondaries, no doubt. Overall a pretty cool and scary list. Nice to see someone managing to make the Penitent host work. Focusing on those units, the Repentia squad's 180 points per 10 of them. I feel like probably a little bit on the pricey side for most detachments realistically. They very much seem to be costed for the Penitent host. Even with just 2 attacks at their profile though, with 4 rerolls to hit and wound and also sustained hits, they will do a massive amount of damage to literally anything they charge. Completely next level in this detachment though, when you've got things like the Palatines, the critical hits on 5s, extra AP from Castigators, and particularly that +1 attack thing, making them all 3 attacks, it's going to mean that they'll drag down most anything in the game with ease. Arco Flagellants are perhaps the other more staple unit, 150 points per 10 of them, and they go in with a massive amount of chain flail attacks. They're no longer twin linked, but still absolutely make a mess of infantry just with volume of attacks, and they take at least a little bit more volume fire to bring down in return, with 2 wounds, feel no pains, and a new invulnerable save. Again, crazy threat ranges on these guys. Infantry moving 7 inches and ghosting straight through terrain is very intimidating. Moving on, and we've got another Bringers of Flame list, this one by a Jerome Eldossi who used it to take first at Geelong 40k Town Open, going 5-0 in a 52-player tournament. Again, definitely a few similar elements here, plenty of Dominions, this time 2 squads with Flamers and 1 with Melters, all loaded into Immolators, one of them taking the Immolation Flamers this time round, more than Vahl with a bunch of Paragon Warsuits, and some Castigators with Battle Cannons handing out their AP and volume fire. The Triumph is also here handing out its Miracle Dice. Perhaps the biggest difference between this one and the first one are the 2 really big scary Seraphim squads. They're actually looking like they're being used as primary damage dealers in this army. There's 2 huge squads of 10 of them, each with max hand flamers and a plasma pistol on the leader. One of them headed up by a Canoness with jump pack and hand flamer with fire and fury. That's the one that gives you extra hits with flamethrowers. So with 9 flamers total in the unit, you'd be averaging around about 40 hits on the enemy, which should just demolish the majority of light infantry units then and there, and the Canoness can also allow you to use that devastating wound stratagem for free as well. So just with average rolling, that's going to be around about 7 devastating wounds on anything, which is perhaps surprisingly punchy for a unit that should usually be good at destroying light infantry. Taking a closer look at the Paragon Warsuits, they do seem to be a massive staple in the majority of armies right now. Very, very expensive again at 210 points, and even with their new and improved Toughness 7, I still consider them fairly fragile per point, even if each model is kind of hard to chip wounds off. The sheer damage that an unopposed turn of these girls can get off, though, is fairly ridiculous. They typically tend to be armed with multi-melters, grenade launchers, and I'd probably go for the Warblades now they have the +1 to hit and wound vehicles baked in. And even just their firepower can be pretty devastating with multi-melters if you can get them within the 18-inch range. They're going to convert a whole load of those hits to wounds, and if the opponent fails saves, you could use Miracle Dice to plug in damage 6. Perhaps the biggest difficulty is trying to get them into the enemy without getting them destroyed first. They are vehicles, so they can't go through ruined walls, and they only have 8-inch move. Rapid ingress could be a good option, or just playing smart with terrain and using them as a sort of counter-attack for things that hit the midboard. Passing invulnerable saves on Miracle Dice of 4 or 5 could be kind of handy as well, as could that Bringers of Flame Armour of Contempt stratagem. Being able to save AP3 on a 3+ in cover would be quite a big deal. If they didn't quite have enough damage output already, then More Than Vahl takes them even further down that path. Again, really quite expensive at 160 points, but she gives them 4 rerolls to hit and wound, which means against vehicles you could be very easily hitting and wounding with literally every attack. And she also chips in a missile launcher, a boosted heavy bolter, and a strong amount of melee with damage 3 and devastating wounds, again rerolling all the hits and wounds for her own attacks as well. For 370 points, Vahl and 3 Paragon suits do seem to be an absolute staple. If you get a 1 turn to deal maximal damage with them, then they can absolutely tear the heart out of an enemy army. Next up, Hallowed Martyrs has definitely had a fair bit of high placings at tournaments. One list that I thought was probably a bit off meta, but kind of crazy and fun, was this character heavy one by Brendan McKenzie, who used this one to place 3rd at Central Island Open GT, going 4 wins to 1 loss. This one certainly seems kind of mad. Basically a whole load of leader characters with nothing to lead. Sisters playing Hero Hammer with a huge amount of Caranesses. 3 regular ones on foot, 1 with Blessed Blade and 2 with Brazier of Fire. A jump Caraness with Blessed Halberd. A Dialogus with Saintly Example. That's the one that generates miracle dice on death. A Palatine with Through Suffering Strength, which is the new Blade of St. Eleanor type rules, so pretty spectacular melee damage out of her. And then the Demonifuge, the Ephrael Stern Lone Operative. Junior Theresa farming her command points and fairly tough on her own right. I feel like fielding her solo isn't the most unusual thing. The Triumph of St. Catherine for all those miracle dice goodness, and then Morven Vahl leading her squad of Paragon Warsuits once more. It is kind of crazy to go quite so character heavy, and I feel like this one's definitely a very off-meta list that most people won't be tending to run, but Hallowed Martyrs definitely supports it with stratagems quite well. Characters can get up for 1 command point with Divine Intervention, so whenever the enemy guns down a character they don't really know that they're definitely going to get shot down. Any of those easy kills will generate some extra miracle dice, and the characters can potentially get some very nasty combats on the go against enemy units using that Through Suffering and Sacrifice stratagem. You can basically force the entire enemy unit just to utterly go to town on 1 character. Say if you had a Caraness, Dialogus and Palatine all charge the same unit, I guess you could have the enemy unit be forced to attack the Dialogus and potentially get the rest of the characters damaged just absolutely as you want it, without them having any risk of being hit back this turn. I feel like you could pull that trick an awful lot if you wanted to. They can be supporting 2 squads of 10 Arco Flagellants that could do the majority of the work and then force the opponent to attack the small character. There's also a squad of small 3-man Arco Flagellants for screening or doing similar sort of melee tricks with, some Sisters Novitiates to screen out the midboard, 2 individual Mortifiers with Boss Blades and Heavy Bolters, and then an Immolator, Rhino and Castigator. The Immolators and Rhinos could carry some combinations of those characters to get them into the fight, and the Castigator again can hand out that AP as well as do its volume fire. Overall a kind of mad and very different list. Not really very much objective control, and not as much raw damage and defense as some other armies out there, but could be thoroughly annoying to get to grips with all those tiny units, which should be able to score quite well as well, running around doing actions and secondaries and things. As we've not taken a look at it yet, the Triumph of St. Catherine is pretty much a staple in virtually all competitive Sisters lists. It is a big 190 points now, but that solemn procession to generate a miracle dice of 6 is a fairly godly rule. Just pretty spectacularly reliable that you can know that you can be plugging that into damage results or advance or charge rolls, or things like lethal hits as needed. The +2 movement aura and +1 to advance and charge I think is quite an important one as well, really extending the threat ranges of anything that's hiding behind terrain in your deployment zone. And then it can back that up with any of the damage or defense rules as needed, extra AP in melee, re-rolling wound rolls of 1 at range, 6+ feel no pains, or doubling down on acts of faith. Then the Triumph itself could just make a nuisance of itself to try and bully enemy infantry units on midfield objectives in the later game with a whole bunch of Strength 5 AP2 attacks. Otherwise, Castigators are one of the most auto-include units as well, just a fairly well-rounded gun tank with 9 heavy bolter shots and then usually taking the battle cannon for the Strength 10 with AP1 and ignoring cover. Should be fairly nice to strim a whole load of wounds off Space Marines, and quite good to have a unit that can actually strike at longer range than most of the Melters and Flamers that the Sisters prefer. And that AP debuff can be seriously nice for just about any Sisters army, helping out things like other Castigators get all the way up to AP2 in the shooting phase, being helpful for AP1 Flamers, and also being really notable when you get to close combat as well. Getting the Arco Flagellants to AP-1 is a particularly nice boost for them. Finally, last but not least, we've got one more Bringers of Flame list, this one by Colin Kay, who used it to take first at Denver Flight Club July Open, going 6-0 in a big 94-player tournament. Again, like the other Bringers of Flame lists, there's certainly a few staples here, Morven Vahl with her Paragon Warsuits, the Triumph of St. Catherine, 2 Castigators and 2 Immolators to transport some units about, though a few of the other damage dealers and support units are swapped out a bit. In either the Immolators or the supporting Rhino, there's 2 squads of Retributors and 1 squad of Battle Sisters. Not certain of exactly which squad goes in which. I feel like it would be kind of handy to split the Battle Sisters into 2 small units and then maybe use the half of them to hold down a home field objective, though I guess they could have just been running up as a 10-girl squad well supported with characters. In any case, there's 9 multi-melters and a melter gun going into the midfield. And to lead some combination of those squads, there's a Caraness with Rod of Office for the reroll ones. She also takes the Iron Surplus for a little bit more durability, and the Dialogers for some auto 6 miracles, and also taking Fire and Fury, the one that gives you sustained hits 1. The Retributors can be particularly savage against anything that's destroyed a Sisters unit earlier in the game, getting 2 reroll or hit rolls against them. Otherwise, there's a squad of Sisters Novitiates that can start in the mid-board and screen things out. I guess potentially they could have been split out with an Immolator and then used one of them to hold a home field objective and one to infiltrate into the midfield, I suppose. Not sure exactly which way it was played. Then a squad of 2 Penitent engines with Flamers and Boss Blades, an expensive but very threatening and quite fast moving units that could go a very long way up the board. A potential 16 inches and then charge with the Triumph nearby is all rather terrifying. And finally there's a Calidus Assassin, jumping around the board doing secondary objectives no doubt. Kind of cool to see the Retributors in play for this one. I feel like people perhaps might have been a bit mid on them with their points cost. They maybe do feel like they're one of these Sisters units that's really exemplifying just how expensive they are per point but are still very dangerous. Likely having 4 multi-melters piling out of a transport with those full wound rerolls against things that destroy Sister Battle units earlier in the game. Potentially working quite well with the hit rerolls that the Rod of Office could bring, I suppose. Still seems they're good enough to make the cut in Bringers of Flame, particularly with those Strength 10 multi-melters, longer threat ranges, and multiple stratagems to help you do shenanigans with transports. In any case, I'll leave that there for this one. Let me know your thoughts on the Sister Battle Army list down in the comments below. Look forward to hearing all your takes down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.